Welcome to this deep, dense tutorial on how to learn Blender. I'll be going over all the base knowledge that I have and some extra stuff about PS1 modeling specifically. This is a great point to start your Blender journey, and an even greater point to continue your Blender journey is my Discord server where I make a game for charity together. So that's really cool. It's going to go all to effective altruism charity. There'll be more stuff later on in this guide about that. So if you want to get one-on-one feedback and actually work on a game that will be released on Steam together, then head over there, and that'll be a link in the description. So now we're going to just be talking about the tools I'm going to be using in this guide. So let's just get right into the guide. I don't want to keep you up here too long. So let's get into it and see you there. We'll be using more tools than just Blender in this tutorial. We'll also be using GIMP, which is an image editing program. So it's just like Photoshop or something. If you have something similar to Photoshop, just use that. I use GIMP, so you know that. Ambient CG is a texture resource we use. It has a lot of seamless textures. So if you want a texture and you want to just have it on an object as just like, this is a wall, and then you want to be able to make the wall have a bigger texture or a smaller texture based on like how wide the wall is, you want a seamless texture. So we get those off of Ambient CG. And Pixabay is what we use for just objects, like say I wanted a picture of a building or a wrench or stuff like that. We get those on Pixabay. They're all free resources. GIMP is free, Ambient CG is free, and Pixabay is free. They'll all be linked in the description. So if you want to find any of those, just go down there and you'll be able to access those resources. So now let's go on to our next part, and I'll see you there. Now a quick note on how you should follow this tutorial. So do not follow along with anything I say directly. So say I'm modeling a horse and I'm adding manes and I'm adding a tail. Don't model the exact same horse I'm modeling. Model a unicorn, model a deer, model something different and use the techniques I'm using, and don't use the exact steps I'm using. Because if you follow the exact steps, you're not going to save the techniques into your brain, you're going to save the steps into your brain. And the steps are mostly useless. So this is why most people get stuck in tutorial hell, is why they quit learning Blender, is they just don't follow a tutorial correctly. And most tutorials aren't actually set up correctly, in my opinion. This might be kind of full of myself, but I think this tutorial is better because I'm not telling you to follow along. I'm mainly going to teach you fundamentals. The next couple parts won't even have you modeling until we get to the actual techniques I'm going to use. Before that, I don't want you to model. I just want you to listen and save the information to your brain, and maybe mess around in Blender a little bit, but don't model something specific. Just like see how the techniques I'm talking about work. And remember, you learn by making mistakes. Say you model a deer instead of a horse and it looks terrible. Great, that's perfect. You're not making an actual game yet. You're just trying to model and learn how to model. So messing up is actually a great thing, because if you mess up, that means you learn. So see you in the next part where we're actually gonna teach you about more fundamental things than just how to model a donut. Okay, goodbye, see you there. So let's get right started on the basic controls of Blender. We'll just, I have this cheat sheet here. This will be in the description as a resource, so that's going to be very useful to download. It'll probably be as a PDF or a text file. I'm not sure what it will be, but it'll be something kind of like this. So if you hold another click, you can orbit around stuff. And if you scroll wheel, seems pretty obvious. And if you hold shift and you middle click, you can move on a plane. Now this is a little confusing maybe, but it's very useful in certain situations. Now before I go over those certain situations, I want to go over a little hang up that a lot of people have with learning Blender. The place a lot of people get stuck when learning Blender is the basic controls. They see Blender and it usually looks more like this with even more stuff. I've made it a little more minimal, but it looks very overwhelming. Right, like there's stuff here, like what does this mean? You know, usually there's even more tabs. I've removed some of those. I have a video on how to do that, but it's very overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff. So most of this stuff I don't actually use. That's why I've removed most of those tabs. You only really need 2 or 3 tabs when you're modeling PS1 stuff. So, and a lot of the controls I just don't use. It takes like a week or so of actually like modeling consistently to get used to it. So it's not actually that intimidating. It's just most people get stuck at the first frustrating bit. They're like, oh, the camera controls I'm not used to, and oh, how does this work? And I just want to tell you, stick with it. Don't give up too quickly, because it's this is where most people get stuck, and this is why most people don't actually learn Blender. So if you actually just stick through this first initial little section, then you'll be golden. So to go over the thing where that shift and middle click thing is actually useful for, let's just add a model real quick. So I have our monkey friend here. If we want to see this monkey friend on a more like flat axis, so if you want to see him like this, for example, very useful in 3D modeling. Or it's kind of hard to explain why exactly it's useful. It's just you'll kind of feel it. So this very useful thing of being able to view something in orthographic view, that's what this is called. Basically, this is perspective, so you can see there's this little dot here on the bottom of or the chin of the monkey here. It's smaller because it's further away. That's how perspective works. But if you look at it like this, that doesn't happen because it's completely flat, basically. So to make use of this useful feature, I generally use the keyboard shortcuts. There are also, if you press grave, you can also get this little thing here. Never use that, but I usually use my numpad because I have a numpad. If you don't have a numpad, you can use the number keys for this. But I press 1 to get into front view, and that's the same key on the number key row as it is on the numpad. And I press 3 on the numpad or the number key row to go to the side view. And if I press 7, you get to the top view. Very useful. You can also flip around using 9, and that's basically just that's it really. You can press the full stop key on the numpad, not on the normal keyboard, but on the numpad to zoom towards the thing you have selected. So say I select this here, and I press full stop, then you get there. So very useful. You can also press home to go through to like the center of your model, but that doesn't go to your selection. I'm not sure how to do that without a numpad, so good luck if you don't have one of those at least. So let's get into actually modeling. You can press tab to enter and exit modeling mode. So you see all these points here. That means we're in modeling mode. You can also press these in the corner upper left here. You have these weird little buttons here. I use these all the time. They're for entering vertex mode. So now I'm selecting just this point, selecting lines or edges, they're called. There you can select an edge if you have that one selected. And you can select the face, which is also very useful, using the face select, which is the third button. Now selecting you just do by left clicking on things, or if you have the box select tool here selected, which you do by default, you can also do a box select by just dragging. Now you can select all or select nothing by pressing A. I think it's actually A twice to deselect, but that's just something I generally just mash the button for a couple times. Then you can move what you have selected. So let's say we select all, and then we want to move this. We can use the little the move tool here. But what I generally do is I press G, and then I can move things like this. Now that's kind of useless. So if you press G and Z, go on the Z axis. Press on the Y, go Y axis, X axis. I find this way more useful. So Z, and then you click to like lock in your movement. You can do the exact same thing with rotation. So you first rotate like this. If you press R again, you go into this rotation mode, which can occasionally be useful. But if you press R in the first rotation mode, you'll see two little arrows for that. And then you press Z, you rotate on the Z axis, Y axis, and X axis, of course. You can do the same thing with scaling using S. So if you press S, you get the scale mode. Very useful as well. And this locking of the axes is incredibly useful. I use that all the time. Now you can also, using the number keys, move a certain amount of units. So say I want to move this monkey up, or scale this monkey up 2 times bigger. So I press S and I press 2. You can see on the top left here, there's this little scale, that little scale text there. And that basically tells you how much you're scaling something. So press 1.5, for example, you see in the corner there, it says 1.5 on all axes. But if you press X, you go only on the X axis. Now another useful thing is you can press Shift and then an axis to do it on that plane. So now I'm on the Y plane. So you see the Y line there, and I'm scaling it on the Z and Y axes. So it's along Y, and now it's along Z, and now it's along X. So very useful. That's mainly useful for moving. So if I press G and then Shift X, I move only around that axis, or Shift C, delete there, Shift Y, like that. Very useful. So if we're done looking at this monkey, press delete this monkey. If I'm in modeling mode, so let's just add the monkey again, I can press delete, and then you get this little menu here. You can delete the vertices, which will often delete like a little more than you expect, than you have selected, because it's also deleting the lines attached. If you delete the edges, you delete slightly less than the vertices, because it leaves, because it only deletes edges, as it says. And if you delete faces, it will only delete faces. So that's very useful. I generally, especially when I started modeling, I only deleted faces usually. You just get used to that eventually, and you get slightly faster at deleting things, but that isn't a big deal. If you want to add something, just add it using Shift A, add, pretty sensible, and you can add something like that. So behind my face here, there's a little menu. I'll pop it up on the screen. It's this little arrow here. So you can add something, and then you get this little pop-up. And if you click on the pop-up, then you get this little guy here. So you can set, for example, the size of this plane here, which that can be very useful if you want to make something of a specific size. So say I wanted a reference for a guy. So I wanted a cylinder that's about 180 centimeters, like deep, and about 0.2 in a radius. So this is about guy sized. It's a little skinny for a guy, but it's a skinny guy. Then you can just like type that in there, and you'll get some nice accurate measurements. Then if you click anywhere, that menu disappears. So that's something to just watch out for. If you do basically anything after that menu pops up, it'll just go away. So that's all of the basic modeling controls. Now slightly less basic. So if you actually do want to model something, I generally use these 3 tools. These are the most used tools. If you only know these, you're probably going to be good. So let's just get into those, and I'll be talking more about how I think about these tools later. So for now, we're just going to go over some basic stuff of like how to use them. Extrusion. So extrusion you access by pressing E. There's also a tool on the side menu for this, but I never use that one, so we're not going to go over that. E is very easy to remember, so you press E in edit mode, of course. So if you press E and we drag up and down, we extrude that vertice. Or that face. We can also extrude vertices. So say I wanted to extrude this, I would get this, just a single vertex, and also edges. So can all be very useful. You'll see when I go over techniques some more of how I use that. This is like my most fundamental thing, along with loop cuts that I use all the time basically. Subdividing I use very rarely. A lot of people teach this early on, but I don't use it much. So say I wanted this cube here that I've created using this extrusion to be more detailed. I could subdivide, and then this entire cube is now twice as detailed in a sense. Like it still looks the same, but it has more points. So now I can select these 3 points and I scale them down, and we get this weird shape. This is generally not how I like to add detail to a model. It can occasionally be useful when you just want the entire model to be more detailed. But generally, when you actually want to add details or something real, so say I wanted to add some detail to the monkey. So say I wanted to give this monkey a mustache. I would use a loop cut, which is accessed by pressing Ctrl R, and I would select these faces and I would extrude. So now our monkey has a mustache. Not a very good one, but you get my point. I wouldn't want to like subdivide the entire monkey in order to just add a little mustache. So that's basically why I barely ever use subdivision in a model. It's very useful in the early stages occasionally, but generally I don't like using it much. It can also be used in like very late in a model's modeling, if you just want it to be entirely smoothed out a little bit, but generally there's better ways of doing that using loop cuts. So I should actually tell you how you access the subdividing. So you just right click and you press subdivide, and there's something selected. Another little note is you probably don't want to do this. So if I say select only this face and I subdivide it, you get this situation here where this isn't actually a square. Squares are important. I'll go more over this in the topology section, but you don't want to cause a non-square, because you can see already like this is a little strange how this is shaped now. This is like, yeah, it's kind of surreal. But if this was just a square, it wouldn't look weird at all. Like, yeah, this is just not a good shape. So don't want that. I'll come over that later. But you don't want to subdivide part of a model without fixing the topology, which is pretty complicated, so I wouldn't recommend that. Also, if you're making PS1 stuff, you don't want it to be too detailed. So anyway, loop cuts, I've already gone over a little bit. If you press Ctrl R, you get this little ghost tool. And then if you just click anywhere on your model, you get a line. First, you'll be able to move the line side to side, which is also very useful. It's this, yeah. So that's neat. So yeah, you can just move the line side to side, and then if you right click, it resets to the middle. So that's really useful because you don't actually want to say I wanted to move this line to the middle. I probably wouldn't want to click like this because it might not be exactly in the middle. I would want to click first and then create this little line tool, then right click, and then you get it exactly centered, which is occasionally quite useful. So those are the main tools I use. I'll go over more in the techniques. I'll go over more in the technique parts we'll be doing later, but very basically these are the actual like main things I use in Blender. As I said, not that actually overwhelming when you think about it. Like there's a couple more things than this, but this took me like 15 minutes to explain. So it's pretty simple, pretty basic. Hope this helps you just kind of wrap your head around what you actually need to know. And that's all. That's all you really need to know. So see you in the next part. See you in the next part. See you in the next part where we will be doing other things that go all together at that line. So goodbye. Welcome to Fundamentals. We're going to be talking about how to fundamentally model an object now, and how I think about just like manipulating a 3D thing. So let's get into Blender and show you how I think about extruding things. So extrusion is one of the most fundamental parts of Blender in my opinion, and you tend to use it a lot. So here is just a model like in steps of extruding it. So here I just selected it all, pulled it up a little bit. That's all I did. And here we have a trash can that I made using these steps. Then you have this cube. Then I just extrude up the cube and make the top like flatter. So say I just did this and like so, and moved it up over to the back a little bit. And yeah, it's a very similar shape. So now you have this shape, but you want it to be a trash can, so you add a little hole, which you do by extruding again. So I just make a little extrusion here, extrusion there. There you go, hole. And then I just added some textures, and it's a trash can. So this is a pretty basic model. Of course, I didn't want to have like 20 steps here, but this is how I think about a lot of models, especially in the early stages of the model. I'm thinking mainly about like what am I pulling and stretching and like expanding. Whereas if you're drawing, which a lot of people are used to, like just doodling things, it's a very different experience. Like you're more drawing outlines and like creating these shapes. And if you're better at drawing, it's probably a little bit more like 3D modeling, I think, from what I've heard from like actual artist people. You're kind of like creating these basic shapes and you're kind of forming something around it. But it's still very different from 3D modeling in that you're more, with 3D model, you're more pulling out. You're pulling out and you're stretching and you're changing scales. You can't do that when you're drawing, and most people are used to drawing, so I thought it causes some confusion in the process, like the mindset you have to have when creating something like this. So that's basically how I think about a 3D model on a very fundamental level. I'm thinking about pulling it out, I'm thinking about stretching it. I'm not thinking about what's the total shape, I'm just thinking about how can I kind of pull this out of it. So basically, that's how I think. And hopefully that is valuable to you and you'll be able to model slightly better now than before knowing this. Hello and welcome to Fundamentals Part 2. So we're going to be going over more topology related things in this video. So we have here a goose, which I modeled for another game of mine, and I think the topology is pretty good. So we're going to use him as an example. So if we go into this view, you can see that it's all pretty even. So a couple other things I wanted to go over were even topology. So you can see that there's about as many polygons or like points essentially all throughout the model, apart from the pillars. Is very a lot more detail like the head, and there's less around the feet, which might be less ideal for animating. This model is a little more high res than in PS1 art style, but it's for a game I made that isn't quite PS1. It's more like PS2. So so that's why it has a lot more polygons than you might expect, but we do have some very nice topology on it, so I thought it would be a good example. So the topology is quite even. As you can see, there's a little bit of a disparity in how much topology there is in the wing here and in the back of the bird here. That's intentional because I wanted the wings to animate a little better than the body of the bird. I didn't really care, and it was mostly covered by the wings as well, so it doesn't matter as much. But and areas like the head here have a little more topology. So why does it matter to have even topology? For animation, it's very good, and also keeps your model just clean. Say I had, what a lot of people do is like this when they're starting out. Like they want to get like a little crease here, so they create this weird shape, and then it's like really tight here and really not tight in the rest of the model. That just gets really annoying to work with. So if you want to do something like this, I'd recommend probably using a normal map or something, because like a small dent like this is probably going to be done a lot better by a normal map, and doesn't make your model as messy as doing it in mesh or in the actual model. So that'd be my advice. And then move on to the next topic, which is making everything square. So very basic thing is you want everything in your model to be square. So like if we have 4 vertices here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that does make up one square. So say this was like, say I subdivided this one, and here we have on the 5 points, and you don't want that because that's bad for animation, bad for modeling. Because say I wanted to make this subdivided, and then I wanted to like do a loop cut here. You can see that's not happening. So, and here if I try to do a loop cut around the entire bird's body, it gets blocked here by this square. All very annoying stuff. So that's why you should keep it all nice square, all nice 4-pointed polygons. And that also impacts animation because if you have to have a nice square, it looks weird when you animate it. So it's another thing to pay attention to. Low poly count, so this bird is a lot more high poly. And if we were to break our other rule, you can see here, I just unsubdivided this bird. Now the topology is worse in a lot of other ways, but it is nice and low poly. So say you just wanted say I wanted to reuse this model in like a PS1 game, I could just have like do so the way I made that bird like that, I did Control E and then unsubdivide, and then you get this, and then I fixed the UVs there on the neck. So when you do that, you often get some wacky results. So for example, here the chest of the bird is really messed up, and the wing here is a little weird. So usually it's not the best way to do this, but just to as an example for you, usually for PS1 style, like this looks a lot more PS1 than this. Just because there's less polygons and looks a little more jank, which sometimes actually helps in a PS1 model. So another thing I wanted to mention was that you don't actually want to make it too perfect when you're making a PS1 game, or at least it doesn't matter as much how like perfect your topology is. For actually modeling something and having the modeling process be easy, does kind of matter. But PS1 models for the actual PS1, those were often kind of wacky as well. So that's just like you don't have to worry too much about your thing looking perfect as if you're making like a really high resolution like photorealistic model, say. And finally, you want to use flat shading. So here we have the same model, just smooth and flat shaded. So here the smooth shaded model, it's actually auto smooth shaded. So there's a thing you can do. So you can shade smooth, and then it just looks like it's a balloon. And you can also shade auto smooth, and then it looks like a slightly boxy balloon. And then I up the shade auto smooth, and then I up this like 45 because it isn't that high as a model that you can just like use the 30. But yeah, so that's how I got this. And basically, the nice thing here is this looks a lot more realistic. This looks a lot more like cartoony and PS1 styled. So generally, you want to use flat shading for PS1 models because they hadn't actually invented this rendering technique, or at least maybe they couldn't do it on the PS1 yet. I'm not sure if it like existed, but like yeah. So those are just some quick pointers on topology. I'll probably be talking more about topology later on in the guides, but for now this is just the basics. So you want everything to be a square, you want it to be even, you want it to be neat looking. So this is basics of topology. I hope this helped. And now we're moving on to the next guide, which will actually be like modeling stuff, or at least me modeling stuff and you modeling something similar, but not the same thing, because that's the instruction I gave you earlier in the don't follow along section. So yeah, see you there. So here you have a video I recorded of me modeling a trash can. I'll just be pausing it and talking over it. So first I just delete the default cube. That's just the Blender tradition. I bet you've already seen that in other tutorials. If you haven't, the default cube and the camera and the light are really annoying, so everyone just deletes them and then adds another object. So I added a cylinder here. You can do that with Shift A and then you add an object from the menu. Then you get this little menu here in the corner. So I set the vertices to 8 because you don't want to have too many vertices here because we're doing a PS1 style thingy. And generally trash cans in real life also are kind of like octagonal. So that also kind of helps with the trash can vibes. Then I just made this like something vaguely accurate feeling for a trash can. So yeah. And then oh yeah, you'll notice a little breaking of my rules here. The cap fill type says n-gon, so an n-gon is a non-square polygon. That's something you don't care as much about if you're modeling a cylindrical object. You don't want to have like the caps be a square per se. That's generally fine, especially if you're not animating it. It doesn't really matter. Then I just move it up a little bit, which was actually a slight mistake because that moves the origin as well. So you can see the origin, the little orange dot here, that also moved up. And I kind of wanted the origin to be at the bottom of the trash can. So I'm placing it in Unity. It's easier because it doesn't go like halfway into the floor. But I messed it up, so you generally don't want to use this menu here for the moving compared to the origin. I would say, what I would do now knowing this, is I would just go into edit mode. I would press G Z 0.25, and then basically what that does is you move using G, you lock to the Z axis, which is up down, and then you do 0.25, which is move up 0.25. So here we have so yeah, now I just press tab to get into edit mode. I just real quick pressed E, then I right clicked, I think, and I cancelled the moving of the extrusion. So basically I just extruded like 0 amounts, if that makes sense. Like I just added a little loop of extra vertices there, and then I just pressed S and I sized it up a little bit, and then I extruded again, as you can see, and then that makes the lid of the trash can. So here you can kind of see me thinking in extrusion rather than in a system of like I'm not thinking about the outline of the object. I'm thinking like, how do I pull this out of the shape I have, which is kind of what I tried to explain in the exclusion section earlier. So now I'm just looking at the model, kind of like inspecting it, something you'll very commonly do. And then I just add a plane to make the handle of the trash can. So I make that real small. It's locked in, it gets hidden by the trash can. So I press Z, or I hold Z, and then you get this little selection icon. I'll show you that real quick. So you have Blender. So if I add an object real quick, and I press Z, or I hold Z, I get this little loop thingy that you can go to material preview, which will show you the material on the object, obviously. Wireframe, which lets you see through things, and then solid and rendered, which I barely ever use because I don't tend to render stuff in Blender because I'm a game developer and we don't render much in Blender. So then I just make a really small box basically, and I move that up. So there you saw me going into into one of the side views using the numpad or the number keys. And I just went into a right view because it doesn't really matter that much which orientation you're in. And then I did a really neat trick where you press R in the side view where you can rotate. And that's a very quick way to rotate on a plane. Because if you just press R in a normal view, like not an orthographic view, you rotate which is just like around the camera's position or like orientation. And that's way less useful than in the orthographic view. So I just made this cube and I made it a little smaller, just kind of messing around with the size a little bit, rotating it. And then I just make a kind of handle shaped thing. I realized later on that I made this a little too detailed for the style I was going for. So that's something I wanted to show you because sometimes you'll just mess up and you'll be like, oh, hey, this is not what I wanted here. And that's every 3D modeler has that happening once in a while. So like, I just wanted to show you this, like me later editing this to look the way I wanted it to look in order to let you know, like, hey, that just happens that you make a suboptimal model. Like here, I just look at it and I'm like, nah, it does not look right. That looks like Sesame Street stuff for some reason in my brain right now. Then I just select these, the bottom face here, the bottom of the trash can lid, and I just delete those faces. And I quickly, here I do a neat trick. I first delete the bottom faces just to be able to delete, to connect these. So I press S, X, and then 0. So what that does is it you first scale, then you do it on the x-axis, which you can see by this big line. And then I press 0, which makes it completely flat. This is incredibly useful for making things, well, flat. So say I had a little terrain, and I wanted a flat area on that terrain because I want to put a house there. I could just select the little area I wanted to make flat, and press S, Z, so for up, down, and then 0, and then that becomes perfectly flat along the Z-axis. So that's something I use all the time. It's a really neat trick, and yeah, I just want to show you that here. So now you can see that it looks fine, but there's actually 2 lines there going like basically at the same position. So if you have something like that happen, you want to go to Mesh, and then Merge, and then Add by distance. And then you get this little menu here so you can increase the merging distance. But usually it just works. And then it just merges the 2 positions into 1 point. So say you have like 2 points exactly here, and they just become 1 point. So very useful. Then I just check real quick if it actually worked. So that's something I do more often. Just real quick, just check like, hey, did this function how I wanted it to? Then I just kind of move it into position. And I thought it was too high, so I kind of moved that way. And this is just kind of tweaking using the G for grab, and you know that little anchor thingy there. I think it's called an anchor. I'm not sure what those things are called. Gizmo, something like that. But yeah, so I just kind of move it around. I end up flipping it like kind of inside out, the handle. I didn't like the sharp at the bottom. I like the sharp at the top more. And then I just make it a little wider and mess around with it a little more. So this is just kind of me editing it, making it into something I actually like instead of just you know. And I try to unsubdivide and I'm like, nah, that does not look right. So I decide I have to do it myself. And I just select that as a loop, and then all right, so what I just did, I should explain. So here we have so I select the face select, that's at the top right here. I can select like points, lines, and faces. So I select faces, and I select those 2. So if you press Alt Shift, I think I pressed there, and I clicked on that one and that one, and that lets me loop select. So like that just selects around the object. It's not that important to know. I could have just selected them one by one, but it's nice to do it quicker this way. Then I just press delete, and then it asks you what you want to delete. Vertices will delete all of the connected vertices, so that will also delete this bit of the handle and this bit of the handle. And edges, I'm not even sure what it does. That one is wacky. I think it deletes the edges attached to it, so these edges would be there, but those lines, but like the square would be gone, but the lines would be confusing. I never use it. And then faces, which I actually use, deletes just the face. So that's what those do. And then I just fill in this. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting the bottom here and or like both sides of the plane I want to create. And I press F to just fill that area. It's pretty intuitive, so yeah. But you do have to watch out. Sometimes you select the wrong bit of the model and you get something wacky happening. If that happens, just Ctrl Z and it'll fix itself. So here I'm like, I want this to be even more low poly, so I'm gonna hide that underneath the model. Then I just loop select around there, and I decide I don't really need this bit, so I'm just gonna delete that. So sometimes wireframe mode can be a little annoying, so you just go inside of your model. It can be very useful, and then I just move this around a little more. I rotate around the x-axis using R and then X, and then just move this around a little more, and then I decide this doesn't look quite right, so I move that a little more. So just kind of tweaking is a lot of what you do in 3D modeling. So if you model something and it doesn't quite look right at the start, then just don't be surprised, because you're still working on it, right? It's not supposed to look quite right, right when you finish the model. Like when there is an object that you can recognize as an X, you don't want to immediately be like, oh, well, this is the model now. You can still edit it and like tweak it into something you actually like. And I actually quite like that handle now. So there we go, the trash can. It was pretty quick to model. It took like 5 minutes, and I think it looks pretty decent. So it kind of fits the PS1 style. And yeah, so I'm quite satisfied with this. And now I'll just turn on statistics. Oh, and here you can see the statistics of your model. So let me just show you how I turned it on. So I went up to the top right. You have some yeah, that menu. I'm always searching for what it is. But yeah, one of those top ones there. It's usually how I remember it. But yeah, the one with the 2 circles. And then you go to statistics, turn that on, and then you can see how many vertices and stuff your model is using. It's using about 80 triangles. That's pretty decent. It's like that's quite little basically. So yeah, and then I was done recording. So that looks. So basically, I hope you kind of got my workflow there. I hope you learned some more about basic controls and just like slightly more advanced controls or like some specific stuff like the delete, such. So hopefully this helped. And now I'll see you in the next part where we're modeling an animal. Howdy! Now we're gonna model a wild boar, and we have here the recording. So first I just open Blender. It looks a little different now because I have a different monitor and other stuff has changed, like the layout at the top. And yeah, so I just quickly grabbed some reference. So let me show you how I did that because I kind of breezed past it. So in Blender, I just go to one of the side views using the numpad, and then I press Shift A and I go to Image and then Reference. Then I go to my Downloads folder, and then I grab the wild boar image there. So you're gonna want to grab a nice like side view image generally, and it's nice to have a front view too, but I didn't really need it this time, so I kind of just like had it like it was. I just used the measure tool, so that you can access that using that side panel with the little ruler there, and I just measured how tall about the boar was, and then I thought, oh, maybe he's a little too big. Actually, I thought about starting, but then I was like, nah, it's too big, so made him like tiny bit smaller. And yeah, so now I just add a plane, and the AC plane, then I shrunk it quite a bit. I moved it up first, no, shrunk it first, and then I G it up in the side view. So then I just do, you couldn't really see it there very well, but there you go. So I always make a loop cut at the middle of the board. So there you go. You kind of can see the yellow line. But yeah, so there's a loop cut there, and then I delete one of the sides using delete, and then I did use the vertices to delete it, and like the vertices option in the delete menu. So then I mirrored it, and I pressed clipping, I think, as well. Yes, I pressed clipping. So clipping basically means that it means that the vertices at the center line of your mirroring, and they clip together. So they it's kind of weird to explain. I guess it just kind of glues it together at the middle line. Like the middle line just it's covered in glue, and anything that touches it just like glued on. So that's very useful for modeling stuff like this because you can it keeps you from moving your mirrored object all over the place, and then basically it keeps you from getting lines at the other side of your mirror line, which is nice. So I just extruded that, and I think I actually did something wrong here. So basically, don't be scared if you do something wrong. I do that too. So I only extruded the side. It's actually a good teaching moment because you should always, or usually at least, when you're modeling something from the side like this, you should be in wireframe mode. I didn't see that because it was on the side view. So I just quickly checked we're doing everything right, and then I select everything in wireframe view, and I go up. So now I just kind of vaguely outline this boar here. Working with a reference like this is really helpful for stuff. Everything from wrenches to boar like this, or animals, or a goose. I use reference in this technique very often in my games. So it's a very nice technique. Yeah, I once again realize, oh, that might be kind of too many vertices. So I just yank it forward, and yeah. So here I just undo a whole bunch because I'm like, this is way too complicated of a mesh for PS1 style. So just delete that, and I select both of those points. So basically just select the edge of both sides, and then I press F to fill the shape. And you can also alt click on the edge there to select the whole loop once you have like built like kind of a cube. And you can just fill it in like that, slightly faster. So then I just quickly extrude the nose, and I just do a quick like pointy shape there. It's basically just me box selecting using click and drag and pressing G a whole lot. That's the only real stuff that I'm doing here. I'm just box selecting two of those things. You don't want to click select because then you only select one of the two dots, and you get basically like the front and the back of your dots there kind of get misaligned, and that's really annoying. So so at the start you want those to be at the same position. See, like say that the dotted back there and the dotted front, they are in the same place. That's annoying at this stage of the model. So you want to keep that aligned at the moment. And now I just kind of make a boar shaped object here. I basically just following the outline. It's not very complicated at this point in the model. And the real hard part starts when you, or well, the hard part, the slightly more difficult part starts when you start adding legs and such. That's slightly more tricky and kind of making the shape. But so here I turn off clipping for a second, because if you extrude a plane with the side touching the other side when clipping is on, complicated to explain. Let me just open Blender. So say I made a model here. Alright, so now if I extrude this here, you can see that I messed something up. No, my example. Alright, cool. So we have this weird shape here. And now if I extrude this plane here, think, oh well, it's fine. Now I can just like make this, oh, and it's still attached. So basically if I turn off clipping, so say I turn off clipping and then I extrude something, and I move it, now it's like made a bee or something, made like a Minecraft animal. Intriguing. And anyway, what I've made here isn't relevant. The relevant part of here is that if you want to extrude something that is attached, clipping, otherwise no clipping. Cool. So that's what I did here. I just turned clipping real quick and I extruded the leg, and I just made a leg. Turn back on clipping just to make sure I don't forget. And now something important, you can see very nicely here that the topology is kind of even, so there's kind of an even amount of space in all of the model, that which makes it look nicer and nicer to work with, as I explained in the topology section. And now I extrude these legs here. You don't want to use the scale tool too much in this section of the model, because it can kind of become messy. And another thing is you don't want to exactly follow your reference, because here the ball is kind of walking, so I kind of moved it slightly forward. So that's kind of a little problem with this reference. Sometimes you can get nicer reference, but this is just what I found at the moment for this board. I actually use this reference for another game of mine. You can use that little eyeball there. So you saw here, there's reference, and then I just want to see how does this look without the reference in the way. So I just looked around, and then I was like, oh yeah, here. So at the top right, you get this little scene collection thing, and you can just click on the eyeball, and it hides it. It doesn't delete it. You can just press on the eyeball again, and it shows it again. So that's a nice tool. So then I kind of move the butt out a little bit. I check how accurate am I to the actual model of the board, and then I just kind of like create a little middle line. So you'll often want to make this middle line when you're modeling an animal. At least I do. It gives it a little more definition on the side. Depends on how detailed you want this animal to be, of course. This is like a kind of enemy model level of detail, in my opinion, for this guy here. So you want the snoot to be on point here, of course. So I just G and then X, because that's the X-axis. Just gonna squidge it over there, and that looks a lot better now. So I just moved that down a little bit. You see there, I didn't actually lock it to an axis because I knew it was clipped to the middle line, so I didn't have to do that. I just moved that up a little bit. And now something you have to be careful of. I'm gonna make a leg here out of that plane, and the problem is that that plane is attached to or is angled. So like if I extrude there, you can see it's an angled extrusion. So that wasn't what I wanted this time. So I turn off clipping again, and then I just extrude it, and then I right clicked, and then I scaled it down a little bit because I want that leg to be going down, not up to the side. And so now I use the trick that I told you about before, which was I go to I do S, and then actually I'm just scaling it normally here. Yeah, I do S, Z, and then 0, and then it's perfectly flat. Incredibly useful. And now I can just extrude it downwards, and it's not like it doesn't go off to the side because of the plane is going perfectly horizontal to the ground. So here I just kind of make a leg. It's all mostly just extrusion and transforming, or like using the G, just grabbing around things, rotating them. It's not that like 3D modeling isn't that complicated. It just takes a lot of like vibes in a lot of ways. Learning Blender takes a little bit, and then after that it's just pure vibes. So there I accidentally had the back there selected still, so I just pressed A, and that selects all and then selects nothing. But yeah, then I just went to the side view. I just kind of moved this around to where I liked how it looked, and I rotated it. Always very nice to do in the side view because you know it's not going to be like off an angle at all. And yeah, so there I saw I had that butt point there, wasn't quite in the middle. So that's what happens when you don't have clipping on. You get the point on the wrong side of the model. There you can see it's like they kind of overlap and it looks kind of weird. So I just turned back on clipping and I just moved it to the center line, and then you just kind of wiggle it afterwards to see if it's like really attached. Then I just make the nose round because it's a boar. Seems like it should be round. And I'm pretty happy with this model at this point. Just do some minor tweaking. Like that leg, I thought it should be slightly skinnier, maybe. Turns out it didn't. So just like, you kind of just want to play with your model, see how it looks. And like there, I kind of like thought that was a little too thick. So there you go. I think it looks pretty good. Of course, it's not textured yet. We're doing that later in the guide. But yeah, so hopefully you modeled something similar to this in your own Blender. I thought that, but looking pointy would look kind of weird, so undid that. So there's just a whole bunch of tweaking now. Make that belly a little saggier because it's a pig, kind of. And yeah, I thought it looked pretty good. You can always check using the wireframe view what's behind your model on the reference. And I was pretty happy with this. So yeah, so that's how I modeled this boar. If you model something similar, I would say don't model exactly the same thing. That was quite nice, so, but I didn't do it in the end. Thought it was a little too high poly, I think, from what I remember. So yeah, basically tried unsubdividing for the meme, but no. So yeah, that was the guide on modeling this boar, and yeah, that's it. Hope you modeled something similar. Next time we'll be modeling a building, so that's nice. See you then. I'm building a community of lots of cool people making a game together. And all the money you make goes to an effective altruism charity, which is basically the most efficient way you can donate money. And if you think that's cool, and if you want to learn game development really quickly, you don't have to be good yet. You just have to join and then you'll learn. Join the community, and I'll see you there. Hello and welcome to the section on UVs. So UVs are a thing we use in 3D modeling to put textures on things. It'll become more clear later on in the section what they exactly do. And I'll be showing you those in this video here, or this part of the series, I guess. And let's get to that right now. So here we have Blender, and here we have my little example scene. So this is an example of a more complicated UV. Let's start with a very, very, very simple UV. There we go. This image is kind of making it confusing. There we go. That's also wrong. Can I? Just none? No? All right. Well, so say we wanted to put this this weird image in the background onto this cube. Just do that for the sake of argument. There you go. Cool. So now we have this weird image on the cube. How does the computer know how to put an image onto that cube? Because for example, like this has to be pointed towards the side a little bit. It's you can't just slap the image onto the shape like 2D, because then you just have a big hole looking thing with a texture on it. You need to have UVs to make sure the computer knows that this bit goes onto this bit of the cube, and that's so basically this point here. So say we selected the thing. This point here is reflected onto the UV map there. So say I grab these 2 points here and I move them closer. See it stretch, and then you move further away, and it like kind of stretches the other way. I make it smaller, make it bigger. So that's like, this is how we put textures on things in 3D modeling, if you didn't know yet. The way we get things onto a cube like this is we unwrap it. So if you ever done any arts and crafts stuff where you have like the paper like cutout thing, and then you have those like little foldy bits that you have to fold really well, and then you glue it together and then you get a box. You know what I mean? Like the little there's arts and crafts like paper construction things. Yeah, those. So this is very similar to that, really. Like just in reverse, you start with the 3D thing and you want to make it a 2D thing, and that's why you have to kind of fold it in a strange way. Now this here is a way more complicated shape, so we have to do some more. We get a way more complicated foldy outy thing, and it's not all connected, whereas this is all connected. So that is basically that's because you can't perfectly unwrap something that's a 3D object, you know, like you can't actually unwrap a sphere perfectly, which is really frustrating to me, but also kind of interesting, you know. I mean, in 3D modeling, I think you can, but a perfect like actual sphere you can't. So anyway, yeah. So my point was not about spheres, but this board here. It is so you can unwrap in multiple ways. Like here, I just unwrapped the head, and the rest I didn't unwrap. You get this incredibly cursed shape, and also this incredibly cursed texture because it doesn't unwrap like that properly. So that's why you need these multiple like islands, we call them. I'm sure you could maybe unwrap this in a way where there wouldn't be islands, but that isn't actually what you would want. There you go. Now we have the actual image that aligns to this colored precary here. It's a kind of pig-like creature. So this image here is basically, it's the same principle as cube, right? So if I move this, you can see texture moves on the animal. That's kind of all I had to explain here, and I'll see you in the next part. Hello, now we're gonna be unwrapping a trash can. This will be a very quick video, so we're just gonna go right into it. Here we have our trash can, and let's just play the video. Let's see what I'm gonna do. So I'm just gonna select the trash can, select all of the trash can using A, then I'm gonna press U, and then Smart UV project here in this little menu. And then I'm just gonna immediately press OK, because these settings are usually fine. And here we have the unwrap UV. So then we go into the little UV menu at the top. There, the fourth tab there. And then we have our UVs. So this is really easy, really quick. The UVs are way less neat, which I'm gonna show now. So this isn't part of like what we have to do. It was literally about 15 seconds for me to do that. So here we have me just like, it doesn't matter what I'm doing right now. It's just to show what I'm, if the UV is good. So here we can see, there you go, the checker texture. So you can see it's not like the neatest texture. Like here we have some weirdness on the side. Like this doesn't look quite perfect, but it's definitely good enough for a trash can, as we'll see when we're going to be texturing a trash can. So especially for PS1 things as well, it works fine to just use Smart UV project. And I just want to show you how to do that because I use it all the time, and a lot of the time I'm just too lazy to actually texture something properly. And I mean, that's a good thing. You know, you don't want to always put in full effort because that takes extra time. But yeah, as you can see, this is fine. So I use it most of the time. Like most often, when especially with props, I just Smart UV project if they don't have to be super realistic or anything. So this part, it's that quick. I'm gonna be showing you the next thing now, how I like manually unwrap something, and then we'll be going on to the next to texturing, I think, actually. Yeah, so that's exciting. All right, see you there. Hello, now we're gonna be unwrapping an animal. This is gonna be a more complex situation because I'm gonna texture paint this later on. So strap in. This might take a little longer than the last one. Not too long, because UVs are pretty simple in general. Let's get to that. And here we have our wild boar. You can see he's currently mirrored. We're gonna keep him mirrored because that saves us some UV projecting, and we can actually use there's a hole if everything went well. Sometimes when you model something, there's actually a mesh still inside of the model. You can avoid that by using clipping in the mirror modifier, as I have here. But that can sometimes be very confusing when you're unwrapping something. But that isn't the case here, so we're just gonna be chopping off its head to begin with, or its leg, I'm not sure. It's always a little bit of like thinking how you're gonna model an animal. That was me just checking, like, is he actually hollow? So I just kind of restarted there. It's a whole process to like figure out what is the best way of doing this. I think I end up doing the legs first and then moving that into the head. Yeah, I do something like this. And that worked quite well. Yeah, it took some thinking, but there we go. Then I make a seam here. So often when you have a kind of bend, you want to make a seam somewhere because that is going to be hard to press flat. So think of it as like you want to make this into one of those models that kids make into like dice. You know, the little dice folding thing, when you fold some paper into dice. You want to make one of that, but like for this board. And if you have a bend, those kids aren't going to be able to make the bend like that. So that's a problem. So you got to fix that by adding a little seam in that bend. Hopefully that helps you kind of like conceptualize what I'm doing here a little better. So this looks pretty good so far. And oh yeah, the nose, of course. This is one of those places where you often will want a seam. So I kind of did one there. As you can see, I'm kind of making my seams in a way that it's on a less popular area, if that makes sense. So you'll be more likely to look at the bottom, at the top of the boar's head than at the bottom. So I add a little seam here at the bottom, or at least that was what I was going to do. It didn't seem necessary when I was modeling it. So I didn't end up doing it, but which I don't think it was, looking at the UVs now. But yeah, so this looks pretty good. Apart from the feet, you can see the feet are this really weird pyramid shape or something. That's because I actually didn't do the legs. I didn't unwrap the legs. Here you can see a good example of me picking a less popular area, or like less visible area, I guess is probably a better term. I'm putting it on the inside, so like the rear left. Yeah, that. Directions are hard. And here I'm putting it on the front left, because that's like, you'll be more likely to see the back than the front. And then I just added some extra seams to the feet there, because you won't be really able to see them very well. You could also just like delete the bottom of the feet, but that could cause some issues. Sometimes it's a good idea to do, like, say you're making a washing machine and it's just gonna be against the wall in between two cupboards always. You don't need to have that like have detailed faces or faces at all at the sides or and the back and the bottom of that washing machine, you know? But that's something you gotta think about when you're modeling it. So here I just unwrap it again, and here you can see the feet look nice now. And this is basically the UVs done. I just gotta make them into a nice shape of that I can use in texture painting. Not as important when you're just maybe just gonna slap a texture onto it, but at that point I generally just use UV unwrap thing. But if you're gonna paint something, you're gonna want to do this. So here you can just see me making it into the shape of a boar vaguely. So I just kind of shape it in such a way that it's easier to draw because it's already kind of the shape that I want it to be. It's not exact, of course, like this isn't a perfect, like I can't just draw a picture of a boar, slap it there, and it'll work, but it's slightly more intuitive to paint a texture like this. I do think there's a little bit of stretching in the head, maybe, but there isn't like enough for it to be a problem, so I just left it in there. You can often get away with stuff like that in PS1 style things. Not to a crazy degree, but like a little more than usual. So you could do this. So that what I just said here is the thing I'm going for. But if you're trying to optimize like texture space, you're not going to want to do this. So here's an example of what I would do then. Probably put the head down there, and you would just kind of like try to fit it as efficiently as possible into the shape. So you can have more space for certain body parts. So say you want the feet to be somewhere else. Now, a little note on that is you might not want to make differently sized parts of your, like differently sized islands, because that can get really annoying with PS1 stuff, because then the pixels on the feet will look way smaller than pixels on the head, and that looks weird. So generally you don't want to do that, but it sometimes also doesn't matter that much. So sometimes you can go for it, sometimes you can't. Kind of depends on the vibe as well of your game or whatever you're making in PS1 style. So now I'm just gonna slap some checkerboard shapes on to show you how it looks. You don't have to do this. It's just something I like doing. So I'm just doing that now, and there you go. Now you can see. There you go. Look, it's basically. I'd say this is good enough. It's maybe not perfect at the chin of the board there. You can kind of see some very, very, very slight maybe distortion there. Maybe. I don't think there is any, actually, now I'm looking at it. Maybe the tiniest bit, but that's fine. You don't need to have it be 100% perfect. That can actually hurt the UVs in the end. So you can see it looks quite nice. I'm just upping the scale here, and I can see, yeah, it looks fine. So this is something you can do to check if your UVs look right, but you don't have to. You can also just decide, yeah, it's good enough. And that generally works. Or you can see when you're texturing it, but that can sometimes cause issues. So it might be a good idea, but it's not necessary. So that was the part on UVs. So this was all we have to say on UVs, actually. So now we'll be heading over to texturing, and then I'll see you there. Hello and welcome to the section on textures. So first we're going to go through some fundamentals. We're going to be talking about where to get textures and if you should use real life textures, like just plain image textures, or if you should draw them yourself. So let's get right into it. So where do you get your textures? Well, check the tools section. You get them on Pixabay for like more pictures of things, textures, which can be very useful, especially for PS1 stuff. And check the ambient CG for other textures. Now you're gonna have to compress those using like just GIMP or something, and you just make them a lower resolution. That's quite compression, I think, but you know what I mean by compression. It's just make them lower res, and then you can use them, or you can just do that straight in Unity. So that's where you get your textures. And should you be using real life textures for your game? I personally think you should only really do that when you're either making a game very quickly and it's your first game and you just kind of want to get something done, as I did with my game Open Fishing Excel. So here we have a screenshot from that. It looks a little bit spooky, according to a lot of people. I think that's partially the fog and also partially that I used the real life textures for everything, and therefore everything looks a little crusty. Here we go. Here's a slightly brighter screenshot. As you can see, it's still a little bit spooky. Yeah, it's just I used all those real life textures, and especially on this brick here, and just the wood here. It's quite pixelated, but you know you can see what's kind of going on, and it looks a little bit spooky, especially at night. Especially yeah, it's just some little bit of spooky vibes. Now that can be a great thing. A lot of people actually quite liked that game. Was a little spooky. That wasn't the vibe I was going for. Especially this lighthouse looks quite spooky. But yeah, the vibe I was going for wasn't spooky. It was just like PS1. Didn't quite make that happen. So especially the screenshots, it feels like something's gonna peer out at you over here. But yeah. So and here we have the fish of the game. Also a slight bit spooky looking because I used the little fish textures. I kind of stretched them to fit the fish in question. So that would be an example of a whole bunch of textures I used. So it looks a little spooky, is my main point here. And if I had drawn every texture by hand, the game would have looked way cuter, way more jolly. Now, that might have fit the game, might have not fit the game. I quite like the game how it currently is, but it's definitely an acquired taste, I think. So I'm glad I did it because it was way faster, but it does have some risks to it, for sure. So if you're making a very cutesy game, don't use real life textures. If you're making a horror game, absolutely do it. It looks incredibly spooky. And if you're making a normal game, like a normal PS1 fishing game that you add a horror mode to eventually because everyone says, is this a horror game? And you're like, sure, cave. Then I would suggest thinking about it because it is way faster, but it's also quite a bit more spooky. So that was a section. Hope this helps you decide how to do your game. And even if you aren't planning on doing a horror game and you want to make something cutesy but you feel like you can't do texture painting well enough, I would suggest making a game that's kind of like either make a spooky game or and make it a little short and quick and just a low project, or make it potentially spooky game like open fishing. It's like kind of neutral when it comes to being spooky. It's kind of chill, but it's also a little bit like I don't know. It's like a little bit eerie, which some people like. Then I would say maybe do it because it's a great learning experience. You'll learn how to make your whole game, which is there comes a lot more in that than just 3D modeling. And you can also practice your 3D modeling in my community where we make games for charity. It's pretty cool. I've probably put a couple of ads in this for that in this video. It's not really an ad if it's free, I guess. You know what I mean? Just go check that out. It's pretty cool if you want to learn how to 3D model. So cheeky plug out of the way. Let's get to actually texturing. So let's get started with texturing our trash can. So we did the UVs in a previous video, so let's just get right into texturing it. This should be a pretty quick process, but here we go. So first we're gonna go in here and we're gonna just quickly remove the previous texture we had, and we're gonna press. So we're gonna press this new button here, and then we have a texture. Sometimes there isn't actually a thingy there yet, so you have to press the plus in the on that menu there. Little plus and minus sign. You gotta press the plus sign. With your object selected. Then you can give it a name there. It's usually quite nice to name things because they're going to be important to Unity. With a certain name next to the field where you put in your Unity material. So that's always nice to have some organization for, especially if you have multiple. So then we're going to just go quickly to the UV editor. You can do it in multiple ways, adding a texture, but I like to do it this way. And I went a little quick there. So go back. So we go to the UV tab as we did before. Then what I like to do is I grab the corner here, corner of the screen, I pull down. So I click and I drag down. That's how you get multiple windows in Blender, or like sub windows, I guess. And then you press that little button there, the little drop down there, and then you select shader editor. It's always really annoying to find, but there it is, it's over there. And then you get this confusing menu. And now I'm just going to show you, you can also join areas again. So if you I right click on the line in between two areas and I press join areas, I can click again on one of the two areas and it merges the two. Very useful. So that was that, showing you this again. Because that took me some getting my head around. I remember when learning Blender. Anyway, we got this here. We got the little graph. I think it's called, yes, it is called a graph. So this is usually how you edit shaders. In Blender, it's all a shader, which I think is really confusing as a game developer. But I'm sure there's some logic to it. In Unity, you tend to use materials which use shaders of themselves, and then you barely ever edit the shaders themselves. So it's a little weird, but let's just get back to the relevant bit here. Is you press Shift A, and then you get this little menu, and then you can just look up image texture, or you can go to the whole menu thing. But I like to use the search thing, or you can drag off of the node, I guess, the little dot there, and you can drag that over to somewhere where you want to place your other node. Yeah, these are nodes, those are connections. I don't know what those are called, but yeah, so you drag that off there, and then you get the little search menu immediately. So then you get this, then you can just press open, and you get this file explorer. Then I just go to my textures folder somewhere over here. There you go, there's my textures folder. I have a whole bunch. And I recommend you just have a folder where you smash your textures in there and just keep them around forever, because they're very useful to just have on your PC. They don't take up that much space. I think mine is like a couple gigabytes, and there's a lot more than just this. So just looking for a texture here that I think would fit, and I have now found it finally. Took a while. So then you get this. So in Unity, you could just say in your import settings of the texture, you can change the resolution of your material, of your image, and then, or like the compression. In the compression section somewhere, you can change the max resolution to like 64, and then you get a compressed texture. Very useful, but in Blender we don't have that luxury, so we're gonna have to grab, there you go. So I just opened GIMP real quick, and we're just gonna make a quick texture that's like a lot smaller. Just get to doing that, make a new file, and I'm not gonna teach you how to use GIMP right now, but it's just an image editor, so it's not that complicated. So just make the small little image, and then I'm just gonna go to my file explorer. After a hot minute, there we go, he's found it. And I just find the same image, and I just drag it into GIMP. Then you get this little menu. Sometimes I don't know what it does, I just skip past it. It doesn't really seem to have much of an impact, generally. So then you just shrink it down, and you press enter, and then there you go, texture done. Then you can just export it, and you have to compress texture file. Oh, and I actually decided to make it slightly different. So I grabbed only the bit there that was I need that little square bit, because I thought it might look better than having those hexagon shapes, those little holes, I guess. So I decided this might look better as a texture, so I saved this over somewhere. There we go. Give it a name, save it, misspelled trash can. And there we go. Now we're back in Blender, and we can just go to our folder where we saved it, and then we get this. Now it's a little blurry right now, so we can go into our little node here, and we can select on the first drop down closest instead of linear, and now it's nice and pixelated, and there we go, we got the texture. That took me like 4 minutes to do when I recorded this, so it's not a big process. It's pretty easy to add textures in Blender, and yeah, so that's the process I use. If you were doing this in Unity, it would take like 2 minutes, so even less work. But Blender is kind of slow when it comes to adding textures, in my experience. Maybe that's just because I'm slow at adding textures in Blender, also possible. But yeah, so that's that. So that's how I do that. And now you know how to texture things in Blender. Now we're gonna go over some other things, like using a texture on a projected UV for like what we did with this building, which I haven't actually recorded yet, so it's a little confusing how to explain it for me right now. But and we're gonna be texture painting the animal at some point, so that's exciting too. See you then, and goodbye. So now we'll be using all the techniques we learned before and combining those to make a building in 8 minutes. Textures, UVs, modeling, of course, too. And all of that in 8 minutes, and we'll get to that now. So we have the recording. So I just add a reference real quick. This isn't entirely necessary. You could have just added a plane first, but I decided to start with adding a reference so we can get the right aspect ratio. So you just add a building here. Took me a little while to find one. And then I just make it vaguely the right size. Now I just add a plane in a while. Come on, get to it. So then I add a plane and I rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis. So I press R, X, 90. And then you get a plane rotated in the correct direction. This might be, this plane might be facing the wrong way. So in 3D models, you have a normal. So basically, which way the plane is facing. So it might be facing away from the front here. So it might be facing this way. It might be facing this way. And there's some settings you can do in Blender to figure it out. Generally, you can also just open you open it in the game engine and then you'll see, oh hey, it's invisible. And then you'll also know, oh hey, the faces are faced the wrong way. So I just sized it up there. I was in the anchor point mode there, so there's a little icon there. Let me show you that in Blender real quick. So let's show you how those like transform pivot point systems work. So I had it on 3D cursor. So here you can see the 3D cursor. It's that little buoy thing. Like it looks kind of maritime-y. But yeah, so if I do this here and then I grab the move tool, I can move. And the move tool you can see sticks on the little guy there. The guy. Yeah. The what's it called again? 3D cursor. 3D cursor. So if I scale it up, I scale it down, it moves around that 3D cursor. But if I move it to median point, which is what it's on by default, it scales from the center of the object of what I have selected. So say I selected these three, then it's over there. I selected that one as well. It moves around. So that's a very useful feature for like stuff like this, where you want to move something compared to the origin of the world. So that it by default it's on the origin. Origin is just 0, 0, 0 in coordinates. So I've slightly misaligned it here. So I just kind of squidge over the reference image. Didn't really need to do that per se, but I did. So and then I made our plane here a little bit wider when I get to it. There you go. So then I just added texture. So you could have also just started at this step. You could have just immediately added the texture to a plane and then kind of like squidged it to be vaguely the right aspect ratio, but now it's right on, so that's kind of nice. And then I just add the same texture. And don't worry, we will be crushing this texture into something PS1 looking. You could also just do it in your game engine, but I wanted to do it in Blender here to show you. So here you can see it's just like a plane of the size of that image. And now we're just going to loop cut around places that make sense. So I press Ctrl R to loop cut, and I just go into the front view, and I go into edit mode, I press Ctrl R, and I get this little line, then I move it down here. So down on this, I wish you could zoom in on videos. So down on this ledge here, and I move another one on the bottom of the ledge, and another one on top of the windows. I don't think I actually used that bottom ledge one, but oh well. And then I just add some at the sides of the windows. So you just like kind of outline some shapes, because we're later going to extrude these windows and those garage doors. I think they're very weird doors, because that's a normal door and that's a garage door, but that's way too short. Doesn't matter. Like what car is going to fit in here? What are these for? Anyway, so now we have all of our little frames outlined, and I forgot a bit there. So you just like go back and Control A, just AA to get into select all, select nothing, and then you just outline that window again. And then I just select, using face select, all of these faces, move them in a little bit, and this just makes the building look way more 3D. It's not exactly necessary in a PS1 style. You could have also just used the JPEG of I guess it's JPEG of the building, and just like stuck that on a plane. That also works. But if you want to make something a little more detailed, you know, you can do this. I wanted that to be like upwards a little bit, so I did that, and then I just added another loop for this door here. And I realized, oh hey, this is just kind of too low for a door. That's not really gonna work. So I just added a quick loop cut there, and then you have the full door. So this is a really basic process. You should definitely know how to do that by now in the tutorial. So if you don't, ask me if you get stuck anywhere, of course, on Discord. But so I thought these should be faced back a little more, so you see the effect is a little more pronounced, because we're gonna make this very low res. So I thought maybe it'll look a little more better. And this is just generally a great way to make a building. So this building is only going to be the front building. So say we made like a street, and we had like another building here, another building at the back there, another building past that. We could quickly like set up probably 20 buildings in like an hour if you really like got the workflow down. So that's why this technique is so useful. It's just really fast, because you don't actually need much of a building generally, especially when you have a street or something. Like the ceiling we don't really need to do, and yeah. So the actual process probably took like, so this was just messing around with the reference, and then we had the actual modeling start at like 2 minutes, and then you're done modeling at about 4:30. So it's about 2.5 minutes for this building to look like okay. And then there's just some small tweaks, like adding some walls here, so in case we want to add some extra space there, and cleaning up the UVs a little bit. So cleaning up the UVs is always nice, but you don't per se have to do it. Like this could work in a game, especially if it's like less important of an asset. But say this was like a pretty important building, we could just like quickly do this a little bit, and now we can see that doesn't look quite right. So we're gonna go into UV editing tab, and we're gonna look here, and we're just gonna select using face select these faces here, and we're just gonna press U and unwrap when we get to it. So I first try to just move them on the black area. Still don't think that looks quite right, so I just press U, unwrap, and I just move it onto the black area there. All your same tools like scaling, rotating, and moving with G, so S, R, and G, still work in the UV editor. So that's how I'm moving these UVs around. If you hadn't figured it out yet, so there we got the road kind of thing. I was thinking that we might hide that with something like another model in the actual game. So it doesn't really matter how it looks that much. But so this we also just quickly unwrap and we just stick it on there, and just makes it look a little nicer. Not entirely necessary, but just a little detail you can add. And I wasn't quite happy with where this one was, so I just moved it around a little bit until it was in a more suitable spot. And there you go, bowling. So now we just need a texture that isn't very HD. Now you could use this probably in a more HD game, especially if you made those windows like reflective. That always looks quite nice. You can like put a different material on the windows and then make that reflective material. Looks great generally, but so this could almost work in a realistic game, but we want to make PS1 game, so just gonna go into GIMP, and we're just gonna make a texture out of this, or actually the file explorer, and we're gonna find the file real quick. There you go, and we're just gonna open it with GIMP, and there it is. So we're just gonna scale it down, and this is another way to scale down textures. It's a little less neat in a sense because you don't get a firm like image size, but you can keep the aspect ratio the same and a little bit easier. So I just move it down a little bit there, and then I just make a little box around it. And there we go, we got the texture. So that is, and I'm quite happy with this, so I just export it real quick and put it in the right folder and name it a PNG, because you generally want these textures to be PNGs instead of JPEGs. Because if it's a PNG and it's this small, it doesn't really matter that it's takes up slightly more space. It's generally fine to look at a PNG, just to save some of the information of the model, of the texture, actually. So I just go into the UV, into the shader editor like I did before. So that's just a process of show you that. So I just go into here, I pull it down on the corner, and then I select the little icon there, the little drop down, and I select shader editor. And then I just go in here and I select, my video program kind of bugged out there. So then I go in here, press the little file icon, and I switch out the texture with the new one. And now it's all nice and low res, but it's still blurry, so we're just gonna make it closest in that top down there. And now we have a building, nice and PS1 styled. And yeah, that's it. That's the entire process. So this is quite a lengthy process for this kind of building. Could have done this way faster, and I think it looks quite nice. Like you could put this on the street with other buildings, put a little road mesh on here, so it just like kind of cover this up and have the road mesh kind of go curve up like that, and then you have a fine street, you know, for like maybe a PS1 racing game, maybe a horror game, maybe a fishing game. Made those in the past. So, but yeah, so this is an excellent way to make a building, really fast, really easy. And I just wanted to show you that, just to kind of combine all the techniques into one video. Sometimes it's way faster to do it this way than the other ways I've shown you. So that's it. That's the entire process, all combined into one video. And hopefully this helps you kind of like think about the whole process in one go. Not as separate steps, but as something you can mix up a little bit, because I had the texture applied before I was finished modeling. So that can often help you model something quicker if you're using an image texture like this. So hopefully that helps, and see you in the next one where we're going to be talking about something else I don't actually remember about. So I'll see you there. So now we'll be texturing the wild boar. It's a pretty simple process, but it takes some getting used to. It definitely takes a couple tries when you first start texture painting, but it shouldn't be that hard. And if your UVs are good, then it becomes a lot easier. So UV section back in the past has some application here as well. So let's go right into the video and see what I have done in the past. So we have a wild boar. I'm just gonna make a quick screenshot of this UV here. So just make a new texture, just new black texture. We won't be using this one, this image here, but I just wanted a black background for this this set of vertices here, or for this UV map. So I can just take a screenshot of it and then move that into GIMP. So now we're gonna work in GIMP. So just open that, and there is also a way to texture paint in Blender itself. I generally don't use that workflow because I don't like the painting tools in Blender. I think they're awkward and I don't like them as much as using GIMP. So that's generally what I use. You can also do it in Blender, but generally I don't like it as much. Here we have GIMP. Just make a new file, make it pretty low res. I made it to 128 pixels by 128 pixels. That was kind of too high, so I lowered it down to 64 later. So I would say about 64, 32 pixels, depending on how high res you want your model to be. And I just paste in the image and I shrink it down a little small and try to like make it fit as accurately as possible to the screenshot. So now with this, I like to color to alpha on the image because it lets me just see better what I'm doing. I probably should have done it the other way around. Like I should have kept the squares instead of kept the lines. Usually if you're working on a higher res texture, you can just keep the lines only and it's perfectly visible, but I made this a little too, you can see, you can only see a couple dots. That's fine in 128, in 64, which I shrunk it down to later. It gets a little hairy when it comes to having it fit. So just make a new layer for this part, and then I just made a new layer, and Blender popped up, so decided to minimize it. So yeah, so I just so make the layer you're actually going to use below the actual like the UV map, and then because it's transparent, you can still see it while you're drawing on it. In Blender, you don't have to do that whole UV thing if you're using that painting technique, but I prefer this. So just a nice brown color there. Just make it entirely brown, and then I add some darker brown to it as well. So this is mainly just going to be kind of like a vibes-based process. So you just want to just splodge onto the model at first, and then I tend to make it more detailed as I go on. So just add some eyes here, and there we go, an eye. And this ends up being a little too high res at the end, but I add a little white dot. Generally, if you're modeling an animal, any little dot in the eye, instead of just having it only be black, I can make it look a lot cuter. So, a little tip. And so this just goes on for a while. I just kind of like add a little tusk, I add a little, so you know how to draw. I'm just using my mouse for this. It's nothing that fancy. But just, yeah, just drawing. And eventually I get to the point where I'm like, all right, happy with this. So far, I can want to see how it looks on the model because you want to check that quite often. So after about a couple minutes of drawing here, first I add a nose, but then I'm like, oh, that looks pretty good. So I turn off the layer with our UV map on it, and then after that I just Control Export actually. So I think it's Control Shift E, who knows, something like that, and I just export it into our folder that we were using before as a PNG. That's actually quite important for this because you don't want it to be compressed at all with the drawn texture. Generally you want those to be pretty high res, or not high res, but high fidelity, I suppose. So then I just quickly add a little pane here so we can see our situation there, and then so you can disconnect these little nodes by just grabbing a connection and then just pulling it off. And then we just add a node here, an image texture, in the same way we did before. So just pull off of there, just type something, and then you get your image texture. Add that one, and now we have it on the model. So you're gonna have to set it to closest instead of linear again, and then we have here our boar. So I think this looks way too high res for what we were going for, and the nose is wrong. So I just move around the nose a little bit. This is just trial and error really, just where the nose should be. Took me a couple of tries. So there you go. There it is. Nose is on the right spot now, and I think it looks decent. If you're going for a slightly higher res game, it could maybe work, but I think it's too high res. So scale it down. I just grab the scale tool, and I just make the image smaller. And then I also make the reference image we have for the UVs, make that a little smaller. So just in the same way, just scale it down. And there we go. So now we can see there's a lot less dots. So this is why you generally want to, so you could have either drawn this in a higher resolution and then in the game engine scaled it down, which doesn't really work if you're working in Blender, but it does work if you're just like exporting it to Unity and using it for a game. Or you can do what I did and actually just use the the texture scale down, but then I would say you generally want to keep a little more of the original texture in your UV map reference. If you're alpha color to alphaing it, I suppose is how I would say that. So now I'm just adding a little feet to it because I got distracted before scaling down the image again. So just add that generally where I think they would be. And then I'm like, yep, this looks good, but I need to, oh, I just do some more stuff here. And then eventually I scale down the image. So it's just like kind of tweaking, adding a little white to the eyes. It's ended up looking very kawaii, which might be what you're going for, but might not be. So if you want to refresh this texture, just go into the little folder icon there and just re-add it, and then that should be. So this looks very cute. It looks like an anime boar. Not quite what I was going for, but I think it looks pretty decent. And then I just continue to tweak it over some time, add a little ear. It's always a little bit of trial and error, add some more contrast to the fur, I suppose. I guess it's the fur. I don't know. Doesn't seem like very furry animals, but yeah, just added some extra contrast there, and just kept tweaking until I thought it looked right. So I just removed the snout, made the back a little lighter. Generally, you want the back of an animal to be a little lighter than the bottom, depending on the animal, of course. But you want there to be some gradient there, and I just kind of removed something there, add a little tail-like thing. Was the idea, but it just looks like there's a slightly dirty butt, which also works, I guess. So I was happy with that. It looks pretty cute, and I was quite pleased with this design here. That's all I really have to say here. It's not that complicated of a process. You just add a texture to it that you draw in another program, and having those UVs to reference is really helpful. So that's a trick that I quite like. So here we have that board. We won't be going over animation in this guide because I don't know that much about animation, and I don't want to teach you the wrong things. And I also don't really know how to animate in Blender. I only really know how to animate in Unity. So maybe there'll be something about basic animation in Unity later, but for now we're just only modeling. And I got away with not knowing anything about animation for a whole 8 months of making my first game. So you don't actually need to know how to animate to make a game. You probably don't even really need to know how to make Blender models that well. Like this guide will be enough for you to make a whole game. I promise. Like you can make a game, release it on Steam with just this guide of Blender knowledge. That's fine. I did that with about this much knowledge of Blender by making my first game. So, and that released on Steam to positive reviews, and people like it, and it's cool. And I'm still like, I released a multiplayer update pretty recently, so it's a cool game. This is not an ad for the game. It's just like you can make a cool game while knowing not that much about 3D modeling. This basic guide should be enough. But I got a little sidetracked there because this board looks pretty nice, and I think that's that section. So next we'll be moving on to talking about examples from Upper Fishing. So that game that I just mentioned, we'll be showing you some examples from that, and like kind of my process of making game models for that game, and like some lessons from it. So hopefully that'll help you out, and after that we'll be going over some more different stuff. So see you there. Hello, now we'll be looking at some models from the first game I released on Steam. I've released another one by then, and maybe another one as well. Not sure when you're watching this, so we'll be looking at some models from that game and going over my process behind that. So let's get right into that. So we here have a guy. Actually, let's start with guy. Let's start with fish. So it's a fishing game. So I made a whole bunch of fish for it. There's like 116 fish in it right now, and that's probably like all there's going to be in that game. But I had to render those out using Blender because I wanted images of each of the fish. I'm not going over rendering right now, but it should be pretty easy to find a tutorial of like how to make a basic render. Anyway, I really wanted to go over how I made this fish. So the fish is just 2D mirrored. So there's a mirror modifier on it, and it's just this plane that's been extruded here. So you can see it's literally just a plane that's slightly thicker in the middle. Like I just this used to just be flat, and then I basically did this to the entire model, and that's how I made the fish 3D instead of just 2D plane. And yep. So texturing was the real kind of difficult thing here. I think this one came out pretty well, and you can see I just used actual images of fish that are public domain I could find on the internet, and I just slapped the texture like I would do it. Basically, I would select this fin here, and or I would first just like unwrap, and then I'd select like this fin, and I'd grab it. There we go. Move it around here, make it inverted, so you can actually invert things in the UV map by pressing S -1 and then X or Y, or well, not Z because it's two axes. But like, yeah, that's generally a very useful thing, because if you don't have the X situation going, it just like say I press S -1, it's upside down. But if I press just X, you can see it's flipped in that axis. So that's very useful. Use that a lot while making this game, and I just like grab this here, kind of rotate it, and just put it onto the fish. And this is upside down. -1. Y. There you go. And then you get something like this, and I just like go through the model like that. That looks pretty good. So yeah, I basically just did this a couple times, about 100 times actually. And then you get 100 fish. So that's how I did that. Took quite well, but yeah, I think this looks pretty good. Well, I mean, I think it before looked pretty good. This was a very low effort situation here. So let's just reopen this guy. There you go. That's how it looked before. Looks very nice, and it did quite well for the game. So yeah, so that's how I modeled the fish. The trees are pretty simple. I just made a cylinder. So the trees I went through, I made a cylinder with 3 vertices. So this is the lowest you can make a cylinder vertices wise, and then I just selected the top ones and kind of extruded there, and I'm gonna move that around. And these are textured in Unity itself, so I don't actually have a texture applied to them in Blender. Often, like, you don't really need to do that. But yeah, so a really easy way to make a tree is just do something like this, and then just grab that same object and just stick a little branch in there using the grab tool. You're gonna want to make sure it doesn't like stick out anywhere, but now it just about does. There we go. And then you just add a whole bunch of planes that you can then grab 2 sides of, and then you get this nice triangle shape. So this nice triangle shape kind of looks like leaves after you've applied the texture to it. It kind of looks like branches or something. So I think this technique looks quite nice, and you can see what I did there. I just did that a whole bunch of times. And you get this nice low poly looking tree. I don't think it's actually that low poly, and I'm thinking about it. It is about, oh no, it's about 70 triangles. So yeah, it's pretty lo-fi. You can of course add more of these triangles, or like triangles planes. If you want it to look a little more busy or a little more full. But I think this works, and I just textured them in Unity itself. So that's that one. Then I made this building. So this building is a little more complex than the building we made before. The texture is compressed in Unity, but it is the one I used in here. Show you a little better what it looks like. So here we see it's just a little hut. These are in the swamp area of the game, and there's a little ramp. So this ramp tends to go underground, or like always goes underground in the game. So it's just like it's a little lower. Often that's a nice way to just kind of like have something transition into an actual mesh. And then we have this pier here, which also just sticks into the ground. So I could have made these a lot lower. So like I could have just done one of these, and then that would also work, but I didn't need it that deep. So this worked. And yeah, so I really want to go over the UV editing I did here. So I did something kind of similar to the fish. You can see it looks like a total mess, but that's because I just grabbed bits of the texture that I wanted to look a certain way. Like I wanted this to look like a roof, so I put it on this roof over here. That's a really effective way to just make a building, especially in the PS1 style. It doesn't really matter what you can see on the building, it just matters that it vaguely looks right. And this looks quite nice in the game. Of course, it's a lot more low res. This texture hasn't been like compressed. So it's just that. And then we have this guy. So this funny Walter White looking man. It's just to show that you don't have to do something very well to have it look good enough for a PS1 game. This is currently the model for multiplayer players. And as you can see, it looks a little jank. But I feel like that actually works quite well with the aesthetic. I think it looks nice. Of course, he's very low res in the game, so you don't see this beautiful face when you're playing. But although that would be funny for multiplayer. But yeah, and this stick is literally just a stick. I just put a stick in his hand. And so my point is, it's very possible to make something that doesn't look that great, but looks good enough to work. Yeah. Also, this guy used to be a lot more high res, but that looked weird. So I just selected him and I unsubdivided him. Oh, that was not the right button. I unsubdivided him, and then you can see nothing happens anymore because he's too unsubdivided. But yeah, I just did that to make him look kind of like janky and low res, which is actually the aesthetic I wanted for this model. So that's this model. He looks a little weird, but I think it looks quite nice. So that's just all the models I want to show you real quick. Just to show you don't have to be perfect, but also you don't have to be But also there's some cool techniques you can use to cheat in a PS1 model, because it's also low res. You can kind of get away with a little more than a more realistic model. So that's all I wanted to show there. So my list of projects for you is model an object, so just anything. You could just pick something in your room, like my microphone or your phone. Your phone is a little bit of a cheeky one because phones are pretty simple. It's just like a rectangle. You can model some headphones. You can just model an object that you can either see or Google, a banana, just a thing. Then I'd say model a character, so either model an animal, which I feel like is generally easier, or you can go a little more complicated and try to model a human. I haven't covered how to model people because I am not that good at it in this guide, but because most of my games are single player, like more simulatory games, so I don't really have to model people, so I've never really practiced it. So model a character, give it a shot. It might look bad, that's fine. It's supposed to look bad, and then I have a little bit of a longer task for you, which is model a game. So you're gonna want to model a very short PS1 horror game, or another game if you want, but like PS1 horror tends to be quite easy. So that would be about one environment, maybe two environments. So like a gas station and a forest, something like that. Something pretty simple. Maybe a forest could be kind of hard because forests are kind of difficult. So maybe go for something more industrial. If you want to have it more easy, or like go for something more natural, if you want to have something slightly more difficult. And that should probably last you about a week. And then if you want to model more after that, or like even during that, if you want to learn a little faster, you can go for my community, in which we're making an actual whole game. We're currently working on Isopod Keeping Simulator, but there might be some more projects by the time you're watching this, where we're working on PS1 related things. And there you'll be able to learn way faster. I'll actually hop on calls with you and teach you how to model myself. And hopefully it'll help you out to like learn way faster. And we'll be helping out charity. And I'll be going to all the money we make off of a game we make together. I won't get any of it. It'll all go to charity. And well, I'll probably get it for a little bit, and then I'll have to donate all of it immediately. So it won't be in my bank account for longer than like a couple days max. Maybe a couple hours actually. Probably better to do a couple hours. But the point being, I'm not keeping the money. It's going to charity. Very effective, efficient, effective altruism charity. So something like global health related, probably. I'm not sure what yet because I haven't contacted a charity yet to like suss out the details of like how do we make sure I can use your branding without it being like a problem for you, and like stuff like that. Some technical stuff, but hopefully we can get with the charities I want to work with, and I'll be able to make as much money as possible for those charities, and then we'll make cool games as well. So if you want to make a cool game to release it on Steam and actually be like credited in the credits, then join that project. It'll also be a probably pretty good thing for your CV to work on that, like it's called a CV in English, your resume. So that'll help out with me maybe getting a job someday. You know, I've volunteered for this for making a game for charity. This is a cool thing to put on your CV or on your resume. Do you say CV? I feel like you do say CV. Maybe that's just a Dutch thing. I don't know. Anyway, that was the guide. Hopefully, if you want to join our community, go do that. Hopefully you learned how to model things in Blender in this guide. Hopefully it worked, and see you in the next guide or the next video on my channel. There'll be a whole bunch of stuff here. There probably already is, and I'll be able to teach you even more cool things. So hopefully you enjoyed this guide, and I'll be now going and doing something else because I've been recording for a while. All right, see you there.